And we are live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's episode of The Rational Standard. I am Martin van Staden. I am joined, as usual, by David Ansara. And today we have a new guest, hopefully a regular as well, Ayanda Zulu. He is an intern and an associate of the Free Market Foundation. I'm sure many of you who follow The Rational Standard on Substack have seen a lot of his excellent articles appearing on there and in the kind of mainstream press as well. So we're very glad to have Ayanda on, and we're keen to hear his perspectives on what you will all know to be a regular installment, I guess, on the Rational Standard, much to my own annoyance. I do get tired of talking about US South African relations every once in a while, or no, not continuously. But the reality is, this is so far really seeming to be the topic of 2025. It started in January and it has not let up. So let me try and give a brief overview of where we are now and what's happening right now, and then we'll see what there is to say about all of this. So I think I have a hypothesis that I've kind of laid out on the podcast before, and that is that the South African government is intentionally going out of its way to sabotage South Africa's relationship with the United States. Now, just based on press reports from the last week, this is how I want to justify this position. So, this week we've all seen that a law was introduced in the US Congress. I'm just going to share my screen here. A law was introduced to the US Congress, the US House Committee on Foreign Affairs, which actually adopted this bill by the Republican Ronnie Jackson, which is called the US South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act of 2025, which, amongst other things, seeks to identify South African government officials and ANC leaders eligible for targeted sanctions. Now, this comes after last week when it was revealed that Mcebisi Jonas hasn't been who he was appointed in May as the so-called special envoy to normalize South Africa's relationship with the United States. But when speaking to U.S. officials in the federal government, they're like, "Who is this guy? Where is this guy? He hasn't been around. He hasn't spoken to anyone." And the Democratic Alliance revealed that his credentials were rejected almost immediately by the Americans. And South Africa did not follow up by appointing someone else. South Africa just said, well, tough shit. We'll leave it right there. Meanwhile, a former World Trade Organization official who I just noticed as a suspiciously South African name, Johan Heeman, he warned that South Africa faces real trouble if it does not start taking America's objections seriously. So on the 1st of August, a 30% tariff will hit South Africa. I think many of us agree that Donald Trump probably doesn't understand trade. His whole thing about deficits and so on, he doesn't quite seem to understand how it works. And a lot of people have used that to say that it doesn't matter what South Africa does. We'll be sanctioned anyway because we can't do anything about this apparent deficit between our countries. But no, that's not true. Because what do we know? We have to ask ourselves, what do we in fact know? So last month, a bunch of South African politicians and business and civic leaders went to the United States, and they asked this question. They asked, what do we need to do to satisfy you, US government? And the Americans, I mean, they gave the answer. It's not this kind of amorphous kind of thing. They said that if farm attacks are classified as a priority crime, if a clear and unequivocal condemnation of the kill the boer, kill the farmer chant comes from the ANC, there is a repeal of the Expropriation Act's no compensation provisions, and American companies are exempted from BEE, then they would have gotten what they wanted. I would, of course, add to that that probably the Americans would look very favorably upon South Africa dropping its case against Israel in the International Court of Justice. But that's just my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. But this is, at least as far as domestic policy is concerned, the four demands that the Americans have given us. They have told us what they want. So, but and here's the kicker. Heman also explains, and he says this specifically, that the Americans also look askance at non-tariff trade barriers. So we saw BEE, but what I noticed that kind of is very interesting is local content rules. So he says specifically the Americans don't like this. They do not enjoy this, and he said this 2 days ago. And then it was reported on the same day that the Democratic Alliance's Minister of Communications has decided to moot and look or kind of mull the imposition of higher taxes or local content requirements on primarily US streaming services like Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime. Ladies and gentlemen, if you look at all of this, how could you come to any other conclusion that this is a voluntary sabotaging of the relationship from South Africa's perspective? Not just from the ANC, mind you, but from its partners as well. The DA has been very good rhetorically on saying we have to kind of fix the thing with the US. And then, just like that, its own Minister of Communications comes and says, hey, you American companies bringing great content to South African television screens, watch out, we're coming for you. Now, just to kind of balance it out, it was reported today, or no, yesterday, that Park Stow, the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, has signed some pre-deal agreement with the US on trade, on tariffs. Now, I don't know where this is going to go, but what I do know is that we are within spitting distance of the 1 August deadline. How in the hell did they leave it up until the week before the deadline to conclude a pre-deal agreement? To me, that does not shout good faith. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's a very long introduction, but lots is happening in this space. So, yeah, Ayanda, I think let's start with you. I wonder what's your take on this, just this mess. What do you make of this?
No, thank you very
There we
much,
go.
Martin, for that. Thank you very much, Martin, for that detailed introduction. And he's just providing some very, very important context for us on our diplomatic relations with the United States of America as a country. I don't want to be greedy on this, so I'm going to limit myself to, I think, our president's response to what the USA has been doing. If I'm not wrong, yesterday he had a brief address to the press. If I'm not wrong, it was SABC News and a few other media outlets, And one of the things which always stands out for me about him is how he seems unbothered by this, how he pretends that everything is okay. Even when we spoke to the media yesterday, no, we're having engagements with the USA, nothing bad is happening. We're going to resolve this. And I think Human in that article as well says the same thing, that the presidency doesn't seem to take what is happening between us and the USA seriously. They're just unbothered. They don't seem to care. And so for me, that's what stands out. This posture that they've taken. Even when he came back from the USA, when he was in the White House, he distanced himself from the kill the Boer chant. He said, "No, we don't do that. We stand against that." But when he was back here in South Africa, he was the first person again to say that that's a liberation chant. It must be defended. No one is going to tell us what to chant and what not to chant. So I guess where I'm going with this is just that our president's response to this diplomatic tension between us and the USA has not been helpful. I think it's not going to improve the situation in any way. And I think it's going to be one factor that really does inform how the US continues to engage us. So I think that is my first point for today, that I'm very concerned about the president's response in particular to this. I would expect him to take this more seriously. The USA is one of our biggest trading partners, if not. So this is a relationship which we want to improve, which we want to ensure is normalized, and the president needs to take it seriously, because the message is currently sending out to us right now is that that isn't a matter of priority, and I don't think it looks good for us in the eyes of the USA. I think
Yeah.
that is the
Yeah, no,
first.
absolutely. I think that actually speaks to, again, in my hypothesis, that actually there is some degree of malice here. If this was just kind of, oh my goodness, the Americans don't like us anymore, I think that necessarily would have led to them taking it seriously. I think the president would have been like, oh, we don't know what's going on. We're sorry. Geez, please let's see, let's figure this out. But the fact that Ramaphosa is just like, yeah, we'll get to it at some point. Don't worry. Stop panicking. It's okay. We have BRICS. We have kind of China and Russia. They're waiting for us. Ugh, no. David, you've been in the press recently talking about some of these things. What's your assessment?
Yeah, so Martin, I was on our venerable state broadcaster this week, the SABC, and I was being interviewed on Morning Live. And it was a reflection of how little I watch television, because when the producer approached me and said, "Do you want to be on Morning Live?" I said, well, is this radio or television? And she's like, "No, it's Morning Live." So no disrespect to the fine people at Morning Live, but I don't tend to watch the show. But it was interesting being on, because I was being interviewed by Leanne Manas, and there was another gentleman from SIA, Gustavo de Carvalho, he's with the South African Institute of International Affairs. And I thought it was quite striking that the tone of the discussion, and, the host, Leanne, she said, well, South Africa is a sovereign nation, and we don't interfere in the affairs of other people, other countries. So why is America interfering in our domestic policy? And I said, well, listen, first of all, I disagree with the premise that we are actually interfering. We're directly confronting one of the United States' key allies in Israel by taking Israel to the ICJ. And we've said very little about the crime against humanity that was October 7th, 2023. Needless to say that South Africa's foreign policy spokespeople tend to also ignore that South Africa, or that there are hostages still being held by Hamas. Nobody can be for sure where exactly they are being held, whether they're in Gaza itself or somewhere else. And I think there's sort of an astonishment that underscores a lot of the discourse here in the media, that, like, why is the United States picking on us? But actually, if you go back over the last 2 decades, South Africa has been picking a fight with Washington, and now seems to be quite surprised that Washington is fighting back. On previous episodes, we've spoken about this excellent analogy by James Myberg of Politics Web, who says that South Africa's communications has been happening on 2 channels. That channel 1 is for the domestic audience, where the ANC talks about the language of liberation, of race nationalism, of the original sin of white settlement of South Africa. Very happy to indulge the singing of Kill the Boer. But channel 2 is all the kind of rainbow reconciliation, that South Africa is a constitutional democracy. And as Myberg points out, the Trump administration has tuned out of channel 2, which is intended for an international audience, and is tuned into channel 1. And we don't like that they're doing that. And so I think the mask has been ripped off of South Africa. And, I think also, if you look at that Ronnie Jackson bill, they're pointing out all of the governance failures that have characterized South Africa, from cholera outbreaks to mass unemployment, the breakdown of infrastructure, rising criminality. And, I think that they're right. And I think maybe people are understandably upset that somebody else is pointing this out. It's kind of like, if you have a troublesome family member who's addicted to drugs and is always getting into trouble, it's fine for you to criticize your family member. But if somebody else criticizes your family member, it's like, hey, watch it, like, why are you pointing out our failures? So, yeah, the truth hurts, I'm afraid. And in many respects, and this is what I pointed out in the interview, South Africa has only itself to blame. We need to look very critically at our own foreign policy posture. And I think there is a lot of malice there. I think it's underpinned by an ideological position. I think people at DIRCO, are true believers. I think they really buy into this idea of the global South and that we must unite these anti-Western nations against the imperialist forces of the United States and Europe. But I think they fail to understand that there are some very real and serious material and commercial interests that South Africa has, that our way of life, our trade relationships with the United States are really important to the sustainability of our economy. And it just feels at the moment like it's a baby playing with a hand grenade and it's about to go off at any moment. And just a real lack of understanding and appreciation for the costs and also the urgency. The fact that we have this 1 August deadline rapidly approaching. And it is just astonishing to me. We don't have a diplomatic presence in Washington, D.C. amidst this intense crisis. And we've been actually very supportive of the likes of Corne Mulder, Gerard Papenfuss and Theo de Jager going out to Washington, taking the initiative. And they're doing that because they appreciate the extent of what's at risk here. They're not waiting for DIRCO to suddenly have a sudden wave of common sense. They're taking the initiative and representing the interests that are important to them, commercial farmers, businesses, and the Afrikaans community more broadly. Same with Emma Powell. I think she did a very good thing pointing out that BC Jonas has not had his credentials recognized, and she's gotten into a lot of hot water for that, but she did the right thing there. So, but I think we need to go a step further. I mean, on this show in the past, we've said that the Western Cape provincial government needs to actually send a delegation. Think of all of those citrus growers. Maybe there's not so much citrus in, I suppose Ceres is a big citrus producer, but all the wine exporters. The Western Cape has a lot to lose from the deliberate sabotaging of this relationship between South Africa and the United States. And they should, I think, get on a plane and also make their case themselves. So I think what's maybe a silver lining from this is kind of realization that actually the ANC government or the ANC-led government doesn't really have South Africa's interests at heart. It has its own interests at heart. And if you care as a South African about your future, then you've got to take the initiative and start wrestling some of this power away from the center in Pretoria, where it resides.
Yeah, I agree. I would just say that I don't think there is any notable level of misunderstanding from the ANC or any level of misapprehension. I think that they get what they're doing, and it's in the beginning of kind of this relationship disintegration. I would have said, well, maybe they don't get it, but at this point, I think the Americans and people in South Africa have actually made it extremely clear that there is actually no more space to hide. I mean, obviously, rhetorically, they're saying, "Well, we don't actually understand what is it that they want from us." It's like, no, it's very clear, and everything. I think we've said this many times before. Everything that the Americans are demanding of us, I mean, these attacks on our sovereignty, they are very reasonable things that would be very beneficial to us domestically. None of these demands are like it's not like Trump going to Ukraine and saying, "Hey, I want a minerals deal. The American companies want to extract these minerals from Ukraine." No, the American government is saying, "Hey, you have a massive problem of rural violence in your country. You have one of the most competitive farming kind of industries on the planet, and they're being murdered by a kind of by people who are being in part politically encouraged to do so through a kind of not just the Kill the Boer song, but a very kind of anti-farmer rhetoric that you find in many kind of manifestations. And the Americans are like, hey, you have to recognize this as a priority crime. That's not, they're not saying we're sending the CIA to come fight farm crime in South Africa. They're saying you have to take care of your own farm crime problem. That's one demand that we think is unreasonable. The other thing is EWC. This is a brand new law. And these commentators are treating it as some kind of institution of South African exceptionalism. This we take property without paying for it. Now the Americans want us to stop doing that. It's like no, it's a brand new law. It's the thing that Ramaphosa signed into law in January. The Americans are saying we will not stand for that. It is even a requirement under AGOA, which our government has begged the Americans to stay part of. AGOA says that countries that have free market economies that respect private property rights get to participate in this American program. It's on black and white. The South Africans signed on the dotted line. They said yes, we agree. And now when the Americans are like, hey, you have this confiscation law, you have to take that away. We're like, no, my goodness, our sovereignty. The other things are very simply yeah, I mean, kill the Boer. I mentioned that. That's the other demand. It's part of the rural crimes thing. It's not even that the Americans are asking for the song to be banned. The Americans would be the last people to ask for that. They have the best free speech protections in the world that allows neo Nazis to march through Jewish neighborhoods. They understand freedom of expression, like it's a normal thing in the U.S. They're just saying, hey, the ANC has to condemn this thing. Just say that this is wrong and we do not accept it. That's all they're asking for. It's a very simple thing. And if you as the ANC react so viscerally to someone asking you to condemn incitement to mass murder, that says more about you than it says about them. And then the last thing is exempt American entities. The Americans are saying exempt American entities from BEE. They're not saying, oh, we don't like your law, you have to kind of change government policy. They're saying if you want business from our companies, from companies that come from America, these are our conditions. They will not play these racial bean counting games with your political class. You can play it with your own people, but if you want American business, we're not going to play that game. Ayanda, these are, in my view, very reasonable pro-South African kind of requests, even to call them these kind of anti-sovereign demands that are completely unacceptable. I don't agree. What's your take?
No, let me first start by saying that I also do agree with what David mentioned earlier on. This idea that our sovereignty as South Africa is being undermined, I think, is a baseless idea. It's simply not true. And in fact, the point I would like to add in that regard is I think for the first time, we have a Western country in America that is really, really holding a country on the African continent to account. I think that's part of the problem with the West's posture broadly towards Africa. I'd say maybe over the last few decades, because we do come from a certain history where we've had a certain relationship with the West. There's always been this hesitance on the side of some Western countries, to take a more assertive stand against some of the things which happen on the African continent, because there's always this fear that if we try and tell them this or that, they will accuse us of being imperialists or being colonialists who are trying to control them again. So it really does please me to see a country finally saying that whatever you say, even if you claim that we're undermining your sovereignty or we're telling you what to do, what is happening in your country is wrong, and it needs to be resolved. I mean, we had a genocide in Rwanda precisely because of this kind of posture, because of you saying that we won't interfere. So even if you have to tell them to clean up their house, they should. So I certainly agree with David there to say that there isn't any sovereignty being undermined here. In fact, there is an excuse to avoid dealing with the real issues. Now, Martin, onto your question about those demands. I mean, not long ago, I wrote an article in the Rational Standard where I touched on all those four demands, and I argued clearly that they aren't unreasonable. In fact, if you analyze them critically, they are going to benefit our country massively. I mean, the first one being triple BEE. We did a report. We collaborated with the Solidarity Research Institute, and our research found that BEE has had a catastrophic impact on our economy. It has massively benefited a small elite which is politically connected. So I don't understand how scrapping that kind of policy works against our interests as a country. The only people, in fact, if you look closely, who are pushing back against this are the guys in the ANC and those who are tied to their elite, because they know that if this policy is repealed or it's scrapped, they are going to lose their benefits. Even with Starlink and Elon Musk refusing to invest here in our country, who was going to benefit from the 30% ownership stake? It was going to be ANC cadres. I wasn't going to benefit because I'm black. My friends were going to benefit. My family wouldn't benefit. They would benefit because the policy has been structured in a way which allows them to benefit. I mean, the ownership pillar, if you look at the pillar closely, it's ANC cadres who are always signing deals with people in the private sector to sit on boards and own things and have ownership stakes. The second demand about farmer tax in our country, again, is not unreasonable. It's a reasonable demand. I mean, agriculture is a very, very important industry in our country, which creates jobs for our people in South Africa. And if you understand it in the context of a country where we already have other crimes which are classified as priority crimes, like cash in transit heists, for instance, then there's nothing unreasonable in saying that farmer tax should be prioritized. If you look at where farms in our countries are located, they're usually located in remote areas. That means they're far from police stations, they're far from hospitals. So if you do have people being attacked in those areas, it takes a very long time for them to get to the nearest station or to get to the nearest hospital. So I believe that in that context, there should be a unique and tailored strategy that is catered for those people. Because if that isn't in place, you are placing farmers in a very vulnerable position, because when they are attacked, who is there to assist them? Where's the nearest police station? Where's the nearest hospital? So if you look at it in the context of, number one, farmers by their profession being vulnerable, and number two, agriculture being very important to our economy, it is not unreasonable to say farmer tax should be a priority. So this idea that farmers in our country are trying to exceptionalize themselves or argue that they are only the victims of crime is simply not true, and it is a misrepresentation of the real matter at hand. Moving on to the third demand which has been made now about the Expropriation Act. Again, I have also written about this before. This is an attack on property rights in our country. And now, here's the thing which is also very important to understand about the act. It's the broader context. The ANC, for years, has openly expressed hostility towards private property rights in our country. We've had ANC officials like the Deputy President, Paul Mashatile, openly saying that they will take the land of farmers in this country. What I find striking is that today they want to convince the international community that, they were somehow misinterpreted, or what they said was taken out of context, or they didn't mean it. I mean, they're not going to convince anyone with that, and we won't give them the benefit of the doubt. We know exactly what they want to do with this act. For them, it's a loophole that they want to use to seize land. I mean, that is my view. And if anyone thinks I'm smoking marijuana or anything, Joe Emilio not long ago published a very, 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 very brilliant documentary, Stolen Ground, where he looked at this very closely in detail using the Tygerberg Raceway case in Cape Town as a case study. And we saw instances of land grabs and property rights being undermined. So what I really find amusing and both irritating at the same time is for people to be clear about their intentions. And when you are confronted about those things, you want to turn around and say people who are now raising awareness about the act are spreading propaganda or lying about our country. The ANC has been clear. It together with the EFF tried to embark on a process to amend our constitution to allow land to be expropriated. So I don't think that the same party today can turn around and say that the act is now being misrepresented or is now somehow being used by propagandists as a campaigning tool. It is simply false. And I think the evidence is there for any honest person to see that the real intention here is to grab the land of people. It's to undermine property rights in this country. And what we need to come to realize at some point is that this is an issue which affects all of us in South Africa. This is an attack on all our rights in South Africa. And the people who are going to be most severely affected by this are not even the people that the ANC keeps attacking. It's people on the ground. It's people who have property, and beyond land and things like that. It's also intellectual property and other forms of property as well, which are under threat. Moving on to the fourth and last demand, which I think is the most important one, it is the Kill the Boer chant, which I have also written about, that this is an incitement to violence. Again, you have the ANC gaslighting us, saying that no, this is a liberation chant. You have the EFF saying that this is our struggle chant. We won't let this go. They've even went as far as arguing that there's no connection between the chant itself and the farm murders we've seen in the country. That is false. That is not true. There have been cases, even though they will not mention these cases. One of them, a famous case, by the way, which was dealt with at the TRC, of Untutsugo Chuene, who admitted that this chant made me go and kill a farmer. It motivated me to go and kill a farmer. He openly admitted this at the TRC. So this idea that they try to bring up, that you're being racist in saying that black people are so stupid that they would listen to a chant and then go and murder a farmer again, is a straw man argument. Because what we are saying and what I am saying is that not everyone is going to interpret the chant figuratively. Some people who hear the chant will take it as a literal chant to violence, and they will go and murder farmers in our country. And in any case, it is morally repugnant for anyone to take platform and say a group of people in this country should be murdered. There's clearly no justification for that. There's no context. There isn't anything that any person can say that justifies a chant of that nature. And the fact that earlier on, as I said, the president of this country has attempted to justify it after lying in the White House and saying he has no connection to it, in my view, is unfortunate and it's disappointing. But the chant itself has no justification. It has no place in our society. And the USA is standing on solid ground to say that it should stop being chanted. There is absolutely no justification for that. So if you look at these four demands in their totality, there is nothing unreasonable about them. These are reasonable demands. Getting rid of the chant is going to ease racial tensions in this country. I do believe that there are racial tensions now because of that chant. The EFF is not chanting this because it wants to honor the struggle or anything of that nature. They are doing this to provoke their enemies and those that they hate and to spite them. So it's going to help us very much to get rid of this chant, because if we keep it in place and people are allowed to chant, these tensions will continue to persist, and at some point they can even erupt into something very dangerous. The second demand of BEE is not unreasonable. Again, as I'm going to say, it's a reasonable demand to have BEE repealed. So we adopt the right kind of approach to economics, and we grow our economy and we create jobs for South Africans. South Africans have no jobs. There are millions of able-bodied people in this country who want to work, but who can't find work because of destructive policies like BEE that are in place. So we need to get rid of that. The third point about farm attacks being a priority crime, I think is important. They should be a priority crime. And we should challenge the double standards in our country that say that one crime can be a priority, but another crime can't be a priority. Farmers are doing a very important job in this country. They are feeding all of us. They are feeding the same ANC cadres, I mean, who can't carry their own bellies. If you look at someone like Gwede Mandashe, for instance, he can't even carry his own belly. Those people are being fed by farmers in our country. And it is totally reasonable to argue that farmers who are doing a very important job of feeding our nation and creating jobs and who operate under very difficult circumstances, who are vulnerable where they are located, should be protected. There should be, and I say this again, there should be a strategy, a crime strategy, which we develop to assist farmers. We have a crime strategy in this country for gang violence because there's an understanding that you can't have a one size fits all approach to crime. There has to be a tailored strategy to address gang violence. So, in the same vein, there has to be a tailored strategy to address farm murders in this country because they are not similar to other crimes. And the last point I want to make about farm murders is also the sheer brutality which often characterizes them. You have people being burnt, you have people being raped, and all sorts of things being done to people, which shows you that the motivation for farm murders is not usually criminal, as Peggy Clearly would argue. He'd argue that farmers are being murdered because of labor disputes on farms or because they aren't paying their workers enough. That is not the case. I disagree with that view. What the sadistic nature of some of these farm murders tells you is that there are people who derive pleasure from inflicting, pain on farmers. It's almost as if it makes you feel good to see people in that kind of position. So I think farm murders, again, and I'm going to say this should be a priority crime. The last demand about the Expropriation Act, again, just to reaffirm this point, should be also dealt with decisively. This is a dangerous act that poses a threat to property rights in this country, and it is reasonable for the US to expect us to do something about that. The ANC must stop lying and stop trying to convince the world that people who are challenging it are somehow propagandists or right wingers. They have a history of siding with forces like the EFF that are totally opposed to private property rights. And so all those demands need to be dealt with if South Africa wants to move forward. I think that's my point.
Yeah, absolutely. David, I think Ayanda touched on something crucial there, and that is the gaslighting. I think on each of the 4 points, the gaslighting certainly directed at foreigners who might be a little bit more susceptible to not understanding what is going on, but more so directed at us. I mean, on EWC, they say no, and the gaslighting is not just politicians, but the press and also lawyers, kind of investment people as well. On EWC, they said no, why are people panicking about this law? It doesn't say the government can just arbitrarily engage in what is called mass dispossession of land. And no, it's like you just actually have to read the act. It says the government is unable to confiscate property without any payment of compensation. And that aside, in 2015, the government adopted the so-called Protection of Investment Act, which said that foreigners who invest in South Africa are not allowed to engage to conclude what is called a bilateral investment treaty to say we have special protection for our property. So in that light, I mean, it's basically just lying to say that no, this is a pro-property government that's trying to engage in good faith land reform, and you're just misunderstanding what's going on. And then on the other thing is on farm attacks. I mean, they say that, like in the abstract, this chant is this struggle song, but when Malema was asked about it by an international TV crew, they're like, "Hey, Mr. Malema, do you understand that some people might feel a little bit uncomfortable with you chanting these things?" And his response to that was verbatim, "We are not calling for these mass slaughter of white people, at least for now." And then he was asked about that by Advocate Mark Oppenheimer at the Equality Court, and he said, "Yes, I did say that." And Advocate Oppenheimer said, "Okay, let's kind of wipe the slate clean. Just pledge now that you'll never do that in the future, whatever might happen." And Malema said, under no circumstances will he ever pledge that he will not call for the mass racial slaughter of people in the future. And still, we are told that we are misunderstanding the context of the chant and so on. So just a hell of a lot of gaslighting, David. I don't know what your senses of this in our new brave new world of new media.
Yeah, so I mean, the legacy media coverage of the White House altercation in May was, I think, quite revealing here, because the media was saying, "Oh, well, look, Ramaphosa assuaged all these concerns, and actually, this is a great opportunity for him and Steenhuisen to say, no, this is not the singing of this song." You know, when Trump was like, "Natalie, hit the lights," you know, that famous phrase, and you know, now there's Malema leading chants filled with in stadia filled with angry red beret wearing apparatchiks of the movement. And so, yeah, maybe that was Malema, and he is from a different party. But, you know, if you're serious about disassociating yourself from the song, then just say it unequivocally. We do not support the singing of this song. And that doesn't have to be a free speech issue. I mean, there are many things that fall within the ambit of acceptable free speech in a legal sense, which are indecent things to say. You know, if I call you guys stupid and losers, and you know, I think this is the worst podcast in history, there's nothing illegal about that, but it's not a very nice thing to say. It's kind of offensive. So and I think what that revealed to me, I think, was a real lack of statesmanship. And I think it is something that we lack in South Africa. So our political class are sort of, I use that term again, apparatchiks. They're not really leaders in a sense. And last week we were talking about the legacy of Nelson Mandela, and we had Herman Pretorius of the IRR on the show. And I think it was really striking. I mean, I think you can go into a lot of detail disputing the legacy of Nelson Mandela. Was he a communist or not? Or, you know, he was actually, you know, he had this kind of cuddly image on the global stage, but he was pretty ruthless domestically, and kind of papered over some of the, you know, the violence that characterized the transition. But at the same time, he did have a sense of statesmanship. And there was that famous moment where he said to MK at a rally in KwaZulu-Natal, and he said, "Throw your pangas and your assegais into the sea. We need a peaceful solution to this crisis, this transition." And in that sense, he was deliberately going against the worst elements of his political party. And yeah, you know, some people might defend Ramaphosa and say, "Oh, you know, he's very constrained. He's weak within the party, and he's trying to appease the more radical wing." But what does that suggest about his authority and his leadership? That he's so weak and so vulnerable that he can't even denounce a song that calls for the killing of a whole group of people based on arbitrary characteristics in a country where there is actually a significant problem. It's not just a kind of a polite op-ed in the newspaper. You know, there are real world consequences, as Ayanda has pointed out. So I think, you know, there is a real sense of gaslighting. I mean, all four of these points on the race-based laws. I mean, one of the gaslighting points there is to say, "Oh no, well, South Africa has this history of racial discrimination, and as Martin has pointed out, that was the bad vibes racial discrimination, and now we have the good vibes racial discrimination." And then the classic gaslighting is denying that the laws exist, but then at the same time saying that they are necessary and important. So I think South Africans are being treated like fools here, and you don't have to be a kind of sophisticated political analyst to realize that there's a lot of dishonesty in our political rhetoric. And I think it's important that shows like ours point that out on a regular basis.
No, absolutely, and I mean that's why gaslighting is such an effective tool of kind of propaganda and of suppression. It kind of demoralizes you because it makes you feel like you are the one who is kind of losing it and going insane. David, you just touched on the race law thing. I mean, the amount of times that in the last year that I felt like, my goodness, has reality ended and we've all transcended into a new kind of postmodernist dream state? I mean, that's happened far too often than I feel comfortable with. And yeah, it's important that uh, debriefing mechanisms, to put it one way, like this podcast and increasingly in the new media, alternative media space, are coming about to say, no, actually, you can believe your lying eyes when you read in a law. It says on a race basis, X must happen. You are allowed to believe your eyes when you see that. That is a race law. Or if you read that the Expropriation Act says it may be just and equitable under certain circumstances to expropriate property for no compensation. You have read that. It is true. You can see it. It is there. You don't have to get clarification. And I mean, I'm the lone lawyer on the show today, but like one of the favorite hiding places for people like I engage way too much with Matthew Parks of Kusatu on X, and he just loves saying, if you think this, go to court, they'll help you understand. And I'm like, I don't need help understanding. I can read. It's right there. You don't have to go and ask the court, what does no really mean? It's like, no, there is a reality to things, and gaslighting is to deny that reality to people. And I think that James Myberg analogy of the channel is very good. And my hope is that it doesn't just remain limited to the Americans. Their help in this regard is worth its weight in gold, but more people need to start saying this from around the world. And certainly, I think more people in South Africa are starting to cut through the nonsense. I mean, just to take a very recent example, I think Moletsi Mbeki has been a rock star for good sense in South Africa. And at a conference yesterday, I think he's reported to have said, listen, you have to take the civil service and cut it in half and fire half. I mean, yes, someone is just saying just say the thing that we all understand fundamentally is the problem. We have this rent-seeking state apparatus that is sucking the economy dry. And he also said, BE, rein it in, rein it in. William Gumede is also quoted in that article. I don't know if he was at the conference, but he's also been very good on this. He said, listen, we have to move away from this thing. Increasingly, people are more comfortable saying the quiet part out loud in South Africa. And now the Americans have added their voice to the chorus. And I think sooner rather than later, we could expect some other governments around the world to also add their voices, to it.
Martin, can I come in there? Because I was at that conference yesterday.
Yeah.
It was the FW de Klerk conference. And yeah, I think both Gumede and Mbeki Moletsi, not Thabo, were, I think, real voices of common sense there. So, Gumede, I think, made a very good point just in the context of today's discussion. He says that basically we're facing an economic disaster that's coming on the 1st of August in terms of the US tariff deadline. And he specifically pointed to the fact that our neighbor, we're an all-consuming neighbor of Lesotho, has actually declared an economic state of disaster because of their tariff situation. So they're taking it seriously. I don't know if they'd be able to, how many levers they can pull to address that disaster. But I think the thing that struck me about Gumede's points there and his submission was he said that we need to start thinking beyond the state, and that business and civil society needs to engage directly with Washington, D.C. And he himself has had closed sessions with U.S. officials. It was also interesting because, Gumede has been around for quite a while and as an academic has often been engaged by the state. And, he's written a number of reports, like he wrote a state capacity report in 2009. And he told us that the minister who was responsible, he didn't name the minister, he was a lot more polite than we would have been, said that the minister symbolically shredded the report. He didn't like what was being written there. Yeah. So, and then, during the rest of his talk, he also outlined, countries like Algeria and Tanzania, which have actually had experiences with expropriation without compensation. And the Tanzanian government in 1980 basically set up a commission of inquiry, a formal inquiry into the effects of EWC, and found that it was absolutely disastrous for food security and land tenure and so on. So I think we're lucky in South Africa that we have kind of a plurality of voices, who are able to exercise their free speech rights and challenge the status quo. But I think our biggest obstacle in South Africa at the moment is that there's kind of this emergent consensus that is very difficult to break. I mean, that interview that I was on yesterday, just before I headed out to the conference, you stray 1 centimeter away from the consensus and you get very quickly kind of challenged and brought into line. And that's why the orthodox kind of opinion in South Africa, the approved opinion, is so anathema to, or so hostile to AfriForum and the Solidarity movement, because they're seen as going against the status quo, the kind of acceptable opinions that you're supposed to hold in South Africa. And I actually think we should be celebrating that act of dissent and those who stand up and don't wait for permission, don't wait for the government to lead the way. They're not operating under this kind of pretense that they are being led and that they have to wait for somebody else to inform their view or their opinions. They're acting out of a sense of responsibility to their constituents and to themselves and to the economy and those other good things. So yeah, I think that kind of overwhelming consensus, we often hear about the need for unity. Unity is overrated, I think. I think we need more disunity. We need more people fighting in South Africa because there's a lot to fight for. And yeah, we want to be able to challenge the prevailing status quo because the status quo isn't working. And I think we need to actually directly confront that, like Javier Milei has done in Argentina. He's not a consensus seeker, he's a fighter. So, we need to fight for liberty, not just politely ask for it to be respected.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think someone, Ayanda, mentioned the BEE report that the Free Market Foundation did with the Solidarity Research Institute, and someone in, I think it was Sunday Times, said that no, we have to criminalize opposition to transformation policies. Ayanda, I don't know if you have a kind of something that you want to add on that, but that was quite. I mean, on the one hand, you get it. Kind of, this is the first time really that a big punch has been given on the intellectual foundations of BEE, and I think to some degree the rent seekers are panicking. But on the other hand, that's a very dangerous sentiment, Ayanda.
No, thank you very much, Martin, for asking me that question. I just wanted to refer back to something which David said earlier on before I get back to it. David spoke about leadership and President Ramaphosa and how he hasn't demonstrated that in how he responds to certain issues in our country. I do agree as well with that view, and I'm not going to mince my words when it comes to this. I've said this before. I think the guy is weak and he's spineless. And his biggest problem is that he tries to please everyone within the ANC and the broader alliance. And the point that I've often made is that you can't please everyone. You can never, ever make everyone happy. Sometimes you have to take decisions in the best interests of the country. And those decisions are not going to please everyone. Even now, most recently, and I'm digressing a bit here, there was an opportunity for him to take leadership. You've heard about corruption in the highest ranks of the police force. You had to take leadership. so you can restore the public's confidence in the government of this country. You fail to do that. Now we're in a situation where we have to pay the salary of, in my view, a thug. And we now also have to pay the salary of some Marxist professor who has no clue on how to fight crime. And it's because of a lack of leadership, and because we have a consensus seeker in the presidency who tries to please everyone. And every great leader that I know of was not that kind of person, did not try to please everyone, whether it was Nelson Mandela himself, whether it was Margaret Thatcher. There's always going to be a time when you have to take unpopular decisions that are in the best interests of the country, but they are not going to please everyone. Now, to your question, Martin, about Peter Wundler's little piece, I forget which outlet this was, where he says we need to punish the opponents of redress. He mentioned this in the piece. Of course, that's a very extreme view. I mean, I was quite taken aback by it. This idea that we should attack people who refuse to agree with the status quo, who challenge the conventional views in our country when it comes to economics, I think is an extreme view, which is an attack on freedom. Part of the idea of a free society is that we're able to engage on these issues, even if we don't agree with each other. We aren't going to agree with each other. And in a country as diverse as ours, there are many things that we're going to differ on. But freedom says that each and every person should be allowed to express their views, should be allowed to say what they want to say without being criminalized. So, this idea that people who are challenging destructive policies should now be characterized as racists and arrested. In fact, this is apartheid era thinking. We should call it what it is. It's criminalizing dissent and saying that people who refuse to accept the status quo should be silenced and marginalized. And what people like Peter Wundler must not forget, because they tend to forget this too, is that someday you are going to find yourself in a position. It might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but someday you're going to find yourself in a position where you also don't agree with what the majority is saying. And they are also going to say your voice must be silenced or you must be criminalized. And I don't think that they ever think about those kinds of things. So they must think very carefully before they say those kinds of things. The last point, which I didn't mention, which I also want to touch on again, is the point of BEE in the context of this whole debate. It has been very interesting to see intellectuals like William Gumede and even Moletsi Mbeki as well, who should have been the president of this country and not his older brother. I think it has been very refreshing for me to see established voices in our country. William Gumede and Mr. Mbeki are respected analysts and intellectuals in our country who have, vast bodies of literature and have made serious contributions to our discourse in this country. So it has been very refreshing to see people like that challenging BEE, because how things work in South Africa is that even if you look at legacy media or many of the think tanks which are tied to the ANC, the approach of many intellectuals in South Africa has been very clear, has been very open. It is to support the policies of the ANC. It is to embrace them uncritically without challenging them, out of the very same fear that some of these academics have, that if they speak out or if they say anything bad about the ANC, there are going to be repercussions for that. They're either going to be attacked or in some cases, and I would know this personally, funding is going to be pulled from them, because some of the funding that goes to some of these think tanks, not us, of course, I mean, we don't get money from these people, but some of the funding that goes to these think tanks is either directly tied to the ANC itself or indirectly tied to the ANC. So that is also helpful in understanding why certain academics in this country, whether it's Kwezi Mabasa or whoever else, why they take a certain posture when it comes to the ANC's policies. And it's a reminder of the importance of building our own platforms, like the one we have now, which we're recording this podcast on. the importance of building our own independent platforms that are going to challenge the status quo. We are not going to challenge the ANC from within or within its networks. We have to be outside its networks. And that's the beauty of being a part of the FMF, of being on this podcast. These are our own platforms, our own independent platforms that we have to challenge them. It is very difficult to challenge people if in some way we are tied to them or our very livelihoods are dependent on them, because they can always pull that from you at any moment or at any point in time. So the fact that we have our own platforms which are gaining ground, I mean, my broadband the other day covered us as well. The Rational Standard, I believe, even the Truth Report by Rob Herzog as well. It has been very, very delighting to see the rise of alternative media outlets in this country. And I would encourage their rise, I would encourage their growth, because we do need a pushback against legacy media. Many of these media outlets in our country have made no secret that they are aligned with the ANC government, even how they report or how they cover some of these issues. Back to Ramaphosa on the question of farm murders. At some point, he denies that there were farm murders in the country. Instead of holding him to account, you have media outlets in this country which lied and said, no, he was misunderstood or he never meant to say that. So you then see this infantilization of him to say, no, he didn't mean to say that, you misunderstood him. So this reluctance by legacy media to hold the ANC government accountable for some of the things it does proves that we do need to have these platforms which are going to call things out as they are, which will tell the truth as it is. So it's a very, very important thing which we need to do in this country. We need to encourage the rise of alternative media outlets, and we need to push back against people like Peter Vundla, who are saying that those of us who oppose, this isn't redress, I mean, this is elite enrichment. Those of us who oppose elite enrichment should be criminalized. We should not be criminalized. We live in a free society as far as we are concerned. And in a free society, we have the right to express ourselves. And in a truly free society, as my last point, in a truly free, if you are a true proponent of freedom, you are going to fight for someone else's right to say something which you don't like, if you are a true proponent of freedom. So I don't have to agree with what you're saying, but if I truly believe in freedom, I'm going to fight for your right to say it. And if you believe in freedom, you will fight for my right to say something which you don't like. I think that's my last point.
Mm.
Can I come in there quickly? I mean, I think the fact that Vundla is having to basically turn to coercion means that he's implicitly conceding the argument. He's like, well, I can't win this argument, so I'm going to have to implore the state to weaponize its apparatus against dissenters. It reminds me very much of those who defended apartheid during its dying days, when everybody knew that it was not sustainable and the whole system needed to change. There's the verkrampters who hang on for dear life to the old model. So I see him as conceding the argument there.
Absolutely. I mean, you cannot read it any other way. And I mean, we are eager for people to challenge our perspectives, and we're engaging with the people who do that in good faith. It's not like any of us claim that libertarianism and liberalism and conservatism are these kind of perfect notions, or that kind of capitalism leads to absolute nirvana and utopia on earth. These things have points that are contestable, but should be done in an intellectually honest way. And some of the criticisms of our BE report have at least come from a perspective of true engagement, and we're very eager to engage on those points. And I think Ayanda's point there is absolutely vital, and this is something that I find to be an unfortunate blind spot for a lot of the nominal proponents of freedom. And you can see this a lot in the West nowadays amongst the kind of the ascendant right, or whatever you might want to kind of conceive of them as. But there is a greater willingness to use force against those who hold a differing perspective. a good example is there's a few lunatic students in the U.S. who have spoken out in favor of Hamas. Very much kind of pro-terrorist people, and they've had their student visas, I think, revoked by the American government. And on the one hand, I'm like, yeah, cool, gotcha. On the other hand, it's like, well, yeah, the slippery slope is a real thing. I know people like pretending like the slippery slope is a fallacy, but it isn't when it comes to these things. When you give the state the power to kind of squash those who diverge from whether it's majority opinion or the opinion of the powerful, you are going to find yourself under the state's heel at some stage. It's guaranteed. I think two good examples from the South African context on this, which people don't actually think about. People don't make the connection. But last year, August, November, I think, there was a group called the African Global Dialogue, something like that. I forget. They wanted to arrange a conference about the Israeli-Palestine conflict in South Africa and have Israelis and pro-Palestinians kind of come and engage in the discourse. Now, the kind of, let's say, the vibe of that conference was a little bit more slightly, apparently, ostensibly, pro-Israeli kind of from the lineup, and that didn't sit well with the Gauteng provincial government and the ANC, and they had booked the Constitution Hill venue for their conference, and the booking had gone through, and then the BDS movement, in its various manifestations, lobbied the ANC to say that this is unacceptable, and then it was reported in the news that the ANC gave an assurance to this BDS movement that they will put in motion a process to ensure that this event doesn't occur. And lo and behold, the Gauteng provincial government revoked the booking of that event at Constitution Hill. Now, a lot of people might think, this is just kind of ordinary democratic in like discourse. You win some and you lose some. No. This is public property, which is paid for by taxes. And the state doesn't get to utilize its power to pick and choose winners in discourse. Now, that's one example. The other example, even less known, I think 2 months ago, Buffalo City, East London, there is some, I think he is a Nigerian or a West African pastor who is now in South Africa doing some weird stuff that I think is probably problematic. And he was taken to court on some criminal charge, right? So very contentious guy. Let's not deny that. But he was acquitted. He was acquitted. He was found innocent in court for whatever he was charged with. And it wasn't a clean trial by any stretch of the imagination. I think the judge even told the state, you guys really messed up this case, forcing me to acquit this guy. You guys made a big breakfast of this case. But the fact is, he has been acquitted. After that, he booked a theater in East London to do one of his things that he does. Booking went through, and the East London mayor kind of very publicly, in public, said, we will not allow this on our municipal property. We are canceling the booking. So this is nothing more or less than property rights meets freedom of expression meets a free society. If you have governments that have gone above and beyond to nail their colors to the mast of we want to own as much property as we as government possibly can, theaters, Constitution conference venues. If you go into Joburg, you'll find that a lot of these skyscrapers that you see from kilometers around, they're owned either by the municipal government or by the Gauteng provincial government. The state is increasingly hogging property. And it's with this idea that it will steward this public property in the public interest, and people can then use it. There's a lot of talk I remember from my university days. If you go to these edgy little conferences, people are like, yeah, well, the state has to use their property to promote this, that, and the other. And it's like, no. In reality, when you give the state all of this stuff, it will deny you the space to make your views known if it goes against the orthodoxy. And we have many colleagues around Africa who attest to this. They tell us point blank, we cannot have a conference in this country, even in a so-called private venue, because we have to get state permission. Because in the rest of Africa, all property is ultimately owned by the state and leased out. So property rights is not just this kind of amorphous abstract notion of oh, you can profit at the expense of your of workers. No, it has a very real connection to all of your basic liberties: expression, privacy, religious kind of engagements and activities, cultural activities. You cannot divorce property rights from any of these things. And at our peril will we just to go with the flow of these media companies, these kind of established narratives that will end us up exactly there where the rest of Africa is, exactly there. So yeah, I found that to be a very important point to just elaborate on from what Ayanda said. Guys, I
Sorry,
think we're
Martin.
looking at the
Just if I may.
I'll give you a last word, Ayanda. Then we're gonna wrap up probably after that.
Thank you, Martin. If I may, I just feel moved to comment on this question of property rights. It is one that we take very seriously at the Free Market Foundation, and I've also written about this too. And the reason why I'm bringing this up now, it links back to what I said earlier on about how the ANC is trying to gaslight everyone with the Expropriation Act, and is trying to convince the world that this is somehow, a reasonable act. It's not going to lead to land grabs or anything like that. I mentioned earlier on the point about them openly expressing hostility towards private property rights. But the other reason I didn't mention was the state of private property rights in our country. And I always mention this in my writing. We have millions of people in this country, millions of people who have no security of tenure in this country, who are living on communal land, who have no title deeds, who have no claim to that land. And we've had many cases where traditional leaders, in this instance, evict people of the land without giving them any notice, without giving them anything, because they want to do whatever it is they want to do on the land. Maybe there are certain projects they want to engage in, or they want to parcel the land to someone else. And the ANC has not done anything about that. And we here at the Free Market Foundation have a flagship project known as Kaya Lami, where we've transferred thousands of title deeds to disadvantaged families in this country, because we understand that private property rights are important, number one. Number two, they give people access to capital in this country. There's this idea that banks are racist and that they're denying capital to certain people on the basis of their race. And you explain to people that it isn't a race thing. This is how banks work. A bank, when a bank lends you money, there needs to be surety that you can return this money. Are you earning anything? Do you have a job? We need to measure your credit worthiness so we know that you can pay us back. So if you have property, that is an important form of collateral that you can use to access loan or capital from a bank. But if you're going to have a government that doesn't give title deeds to people, that doesn't give them security of tenure, how will they be able to access capital that they need in this country? So the question of property rights, for me, I think what I wanted to add is a very sensitive one. It's something I take very personally, because there are millions of people in this country who don't have them, who are living on land where they could be evicted at any point in time. And that is something the ANC doesn't want to speak about. It tries its best to suppress that, but that is precisely what the NP government denied millions of people in this country: property rights, owning property. And the ANC hasn't done anything to change that. It has no interest in changing that. It is us, it is organizations like the Free Market Foundation which are changing that. And I think I want us to keep doing that, to keep changing people's lives, giving them the power to really access capital, but to also have property, which is something that the ANC has denied to them. And we must keep saying that the ANC has denied millions of people access to property rights in this country.
Well said. Yeah, David, last word from you.
Yeah, I just want to echo what you guys have been saying about private property rights. So there's the economic impact, collateral security of tenure, intergenerational wealth transfer, but then also the civil liberties component. And that's why property rights it's not just like some policy decision that may or may not optimize for economic development. It's fundamental to who we are as human beings, that our right of ownership must be respected and defended as well. And a lot of people also, they see gun violence getting out of control in South Africa, and that is definitely very worrying. But intrinsic to property rights is also your ability to defend your property against state coercion, but also coercion from others. And so that's why, we'd also be very strong supporters of your rights to bear arms. That's also a very important ability for you to defend your rights. But yeah, I guess closing remarks from me are, I think this whole episode with this trade war has revealed, I think, in some ways, the impotence of the South African state, that they act and behave as if they are the custodians of the national interest, but they're actually are threatening the national interest. And at what point do you say, okay, well, this government no longer represents the legitimate interests of its citizens, and how do we mitigate against that? And I think, as I was saying earlier, some of the steps that have been taken by this Afrikaner delegation, by other civil society groups that are trying to build pressure against the South African state, I think that that's very necessary and important. And sometimes the most patriotic thing you can do is to criticize your government. I think we need a lot more other actors, particularly the business community, which has a lot to lose here, as well as the media establishment, need to start changing its narrative about the conduct of our foreign affairs representatives and the executive more broadly. So those are my closing remarks, gentlemen. Thank you very much for the lively discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. Well said. Yeah, just from my side, this is the key thing. It is to divorce yourself as a South African, and certainly as a foreigner who wants to engage with South Africa, from the kind of 4x5 cutout of acceptable opinion on South Africa. The ANC has dominated our political landscape for decades, so a lot of things might seem normal to the observer, certainly the South African observer, that is actually not a good thing and is very abnormal. So to our Minister of Communications, who is a DA person, the ANC's established record of having these local content requirements, whether it's in kind of media or in steel and what manufacturing, whatever, these are not good things. And you, as a liberal party, as a liberal deployee of a liberal party in government, this is not the right way to go about it. Claudia Motsoeneng, former COO of SABC, founded a whole political party with its single issue as African content, local content, the African content movement. It got in the 2019 elections 4,800 votes, and in the 2024 election, it got 5,100 votes. South Africans do not care. We do not have economic nationalism of this sort in this country. People are not tripping over themselves to see more South African products on the shelves or to see more South African content on Netflix. The people who watch Netflix in this country are looking for the American content that Netflix offers. So this is not a vote getter. This is unashamed lobbying by a very big company that I will not mention, that I think we all know in this country, which is very keen on broadcasting, that I can guarantee they lobbied the minister to go ahead with this, because they've been asking for this for years now. So this is just bad. This should not be coming from the free market capitalism.
It's unnecessary. Look at Showmax. Go and open Showmax on your television, and you will see loads of great local content there. Afrikaans content, other African language content. I mean, there was this this very popular show about Shaka Zulu, which was delving into South African history, and people lapped it up. You don't need through regulatory action to enforce this kind of stuff. Like, there's a market for it, it will emerge. But if people want to watch Tom Cruise flying a fighter jet or whatever, just let them bloody well watch it. It's not everything has to be sort of curated and prescribed by the state. I mean, it's a small thing, but it's actually quite revealing. Even the fact that Motsoneng formed a political party to advance this very narrow interest shows you that we're just so obsessed with the state that we think that the only way we can advance our cause is by forming a political party. It's like, just if you care about this, just rally around the idea. Start a movement, a civic movement. It doesn't have to be branded with the seal of politics. I think we need less politics in South Africa, more broadly, actually.
No, exactly. And the point with that, I think, is just that our salvation is not in the realm of politics. Even the much vaunted DA in our politics has gone into parliament and gone into the executive with bad policy. Have gone in there to say we're going to copy paste ANC policy. So what is the answer? It is what Ayanda said: the Free Market Foundation's Kayalam project. We are taking the onus away from the state and just giving the power to the people. It is the Solidarity Movement's delegation in February to the US and the more recent Afrikaner delegation saying we're not going to get permission from the government to go and speak about our interests to foreign actors. That is the right way to do it. It is Sakeliga, the business community, that is very much focused on this key point of state-proofing business against political harm rather than waiting around in front of the union buildings for some favor. That is where South Africa's salvation is. It is AfriForum going into communities and saying, oh, there is a problem, there is a pothole, or there is crime. Let us go and solve it, rather than saying, who should we call to fix that pothole, or who should we call to fix that crime problem? The solution is internal. And I think every time we see organization, when we see communities getting together and organizing a solution, it just works. It just works. This is the lesson that I think the last few decades in South Africa has given us. Waiting around does not work. Organizing to solve the problem does work, and doing that without waiting for permission from the state is the key thing. And that does include something as complex as geopolitics. It can be done. Going to the Americans and saying there is a wide open ocean between the ANC and the rest of this country. If you're going to punish someone, punish the ANC. And that has borne fruit. The Americans do not want to impose general sanctions on South Africa. They have said we're going to target the guilty parties. The tariff, obviously, is a different issue. That is Donald Trump's economic miseducation. Can't do anything about that. Much of the world is going to potentially suffer under that. But the general principle is do as much as you can internally to fend off whatever harm is coming your way that is politically contrived, and there is a lot that you can do. And that is, I think, the key message that you're going to be getting from the Free Market Foundation, from the Rational Standard, and certainly from us individually as well in our writing. But that is it for this week, ladies and gentlemen. Another, I think, interesting episode, and we hope you all enjoyed that, especially to those who made the time to join us live. Again, there were quite a few of you, so thank you for that, and thank you to everyone else who's going to be watching this content over the weekend. Please remember to like and subscribe on YouTube. Click the bell icon to be notified whenever we upload our next content. Please go over to the Rational Standard, rationalstandard.com. Restack our content there, share it on Substack and on other social media platforms. And that will take us on to next week. And potentially we're going to talk about US-South African relations yet again. We'll see, ladies and gentlemen. Go well. Cheerio.
Bye-bye.